This is a very important confrontation that happened on Capitol Hill. Senator Rand Paul pressing DHS Secretary Mayorkas about the Disinformation Governance Board. And I think that Rand Paul said something that we've been trying to emphasize here, which is that the US government cannot and should not be able to sort out what is disinformation because it has been one of the greatest purveyors of disinformation in the history of the world. Let's watch that confrontation.
Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media? I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
He's right. Look, no matter who you are, Mayorkas, Trump, Obama, Bill Clinton, all the way back, FDR, even the best presidents, they have sowed disinformation. It is the job of the press and of a free society in order to expose that disinformation and for all of us in order to consider the ups and the downs and the plus and the minus. So we should not have any entity out there which is government affiliated, issuing guidance on this. I mean, I'll even go so far as to say on the Russians, I don't think it is up to America to say that the Russians are sowing, they can say, look, we disagree, with this. I think it should be up to us. They can issue, guidance or whatever, but they should not be out there declaring and classifying things and then feeding that to the tech companies, Krystal. And that is what this new board, by all accounts, appears to be doing. They say we're going to stick only to foreign disinformation. But as Rand Paul, you think we need the DHS to tell us that people, the drug smugglers are feeding Hondurans?
People.
Oh, no. Oh, wow. What a novel concept.
There were a couple things I really appreciated about that whole speech. And I have a healthy bit of skepticism about Rand Paul. So when I saw this going viral, it was not a sure thing for me that I was going to like what he had to say. But there were two things I really appreciated. Number one was that he used examples that were from Republican administrations. For a Republican to directly call out the George W. Bush administration, weapons of mass destruction. That is a very new phenomenon, and it is not certainly across the board. We saw in the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation hearings how they were still using this, trying to defend torture and trying to use against her the fact that she had been on the side of standing up for the Constitution against indefinite detention and those things against her. So those politics are not dead. There are still a lot of people in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, by the way, who still are totally in neocon brain land. So I appreciated that. Pointed to Iran-Contra, of course, that's under the Reagan administration. So that made the point really honest and salient because he wasn't just cherry picking the Democratic abuses, of which there are many, right?
Yes.
So I appreciated that. The other part I really appreciated was something that we've talked about on this show here before, is he made this comment do you really think that the American people are so stupid that they can't figure out that smugglers are lying and trafficking in disinformation? And that's, to me, really the crux of this whole issue, is that you have a large and growing sentiment of elected officials and also just, frankly, regular Americans who don't believe that their fellow citizens are really up to participating as citizens in a democracy, that they can't handle it. that concern has been present since the founding of the Republic.
Literally.
And that when you have that sentiment of like, I can't trust these people out here to be, in the messy give and take of a democracy and figure things out for themselves with the help of a free press and with all of the, wealth of information that exists out there in our ecosystem now, when you get to that point, then what does that justify? That justifies you can't handle it. First of all, we're going to censor you. We're not going to allow you to see certain things. We're not going to allow you to say certain things. It leads to police state authoritarianism atmosphere. And it also leads to the flip side of that is, so we have to hand total control to the experts. It's just this group of educated, credentialed elites. They're the only ones we can really trust with this governance and democracy stuff. Like, democracy is not for the people. And so I really appreciate that his point gets at that piece, because I really think that's that's why this debate is so incredibly important.
100%. And let's just be reminded of who the new head of this board is, the so-called
Found the
disinformation.
most cringe person in the entire country.
No, literally, yeah. Like I said, look, theater kid who, unlike me, was not mugged by reality. The worst of all worlds. Here's where she gave a recent interview. Let's take a listen.
There's already this idea, this allegation that there is anti-conservative bias on the platforms, even though there has been study after study proving, in fact, that often it's liberal voices that are being silenced, particularly minority voices on social media.
Where do these fake studies come from? Do I doubt that there are, actually, liberal is not the right word. Are there left accounts which are censored? Yeah,
yes.
All of the time. And we have pointed to many of those instances, specifically who are anti-imperialist or anti-war activists are the most likely. Some of them may be people of color. Are liberal voices, BLM activists getting silenced on Twitter? Get out of here, okay? That is the most ludicrous accusation. And they always come up with this fake data and these experts in order to just justify a censorious, elite liberal point of view. I wish they would just say that. They're like, listen, we think some voices are abhorrent, we think others aren't, and not rely on all of this fakery. But look, deserves serious scrutiny. This lady is now the head of a US government agency with possible power over social media companies, over very least guidance, whatever that means, from the Department of Homeland Security, which is the largest law enforcement agency in the entire United States. A lot of people forget that. They have immense power over our lives.
Yeah, I thought about her comment there a lot, actually. First of all, I think it's a little revealing that she just conflates liberals and people of color as if there's no ideological diversity. I'm sure that there are a lot of people of color who are being censored who have dissident views.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. The reason why you don't see liberal voices being censored like you do, voices who are outside of the mainstream is because, these companies are run by billionaires and, they are culturally, they tend to have, a very specific sort of ideology that conforms with what, the liberal media wants to put out there. So yeah, if you're basically in line with the cultural views of the powers that be, then you're not going to be censored. You're not ultimately going to have an issue. To me, it doesn't really matter which part of the spectrum is being censored more or less, because this is a value. It's about the values. It's about the principles. It's about being committed to living in a democracy and what that ultimately entails. So cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.